Good late evening. This is Judge Jackson Felt, a former Superior Court Judge Pro Tem. And after having heard about 400 to 500 traffic trials, I've decided to open up in the very optimistic aim of improving the nation's judiciary, because I see some of the most horrible judges that deserve to be immediately thrown off the bench. And I have one right here today that we're going to just see if we can get that done. Now, this is episode 1 of the worst judges in the world, and I'm going to bring you some that I see that are not only, of course, just terrible judges, but I'm going to show you the corrective action that should have been taken by the judge so that any other judge that watches this that is lacking, and I'm not saying there are a lot that are lacking, but that is lacking, they will have the opportunity to make this a learning experience by seeing this horrible one here that is just absolutely unbelievable. And I think the easiest way to see why this judge is terrible is at least for me to give you just a couple of the rules that everyone is expected to follow in court, every litigant. And you'll see how quickly she loses control of the courtroom. But it's her job to keep control of the courtroom. And the way she has to do that is by making sure that anybody who doesn't have permission to speak does not speak. Anyone who starts to speak out without permission, she should kindly, the first time, remind them that that is a violation of the court rules, and that if they do it again, they will be held in contempt. Some judges like to say what the first contempt will be. It's usually $50. Some judges don't like to say it and just will leave that to be decided at the hearing on whether they actually will be held in contempt. Yeah, I usually see it between $50 and $100, and there are a couple of judges I know who just say, no, the first one's 1 day in jail. This applies only to contempts that the judge sees in front of him or her. If somebody brings the person into court and says, I want them held in contempt because of something they did 2 days ago, these rules don't apply. So we're only talking about direct contempt is the name of it, and that's where the person does horrible things like this litigant does. He's one of the very worst I've ever seen. But I think if you watch this, you're going to see that she is clearly over her head. In over her head is the right expression. And she just cannot control this litigant. And, I hesitate to say she can't because I think she could, but she won't. And I don't want to psychoanalyze anybody, but and I'm not in any position to do that. But I'm going to bet this is the way her household looked, that she had an abusive husband who yelled at her and interrupted her and pushed her around, and she responded to it by going, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, instead of actually doing something. What she really reminds me of, and I was going to say this at the end of today's worst judge in the world, she reminds me, we see a couple on another podcast show that has to do with police stops, and there's a couple of them that just break your heart, where a female officer does not have the courage to shoot the bad guy. The bad guy has got her partner's gun. He's obviously going to shoot her partner or her, or himself, I guess, and she has to shoot the bad guy. She has to put a bullet in his head to stop him from shooting her partner, and they don't do it. And the one that I know that's really pathetic is where instead she shoots her partner in the leg. And that is what this judge does. She does not have the courage to protect the other members of the court, the other litigants, the prosecutor for sure, whose time is being wasted and who sees her cases being just left in shreds.
Palmer Hicks. Names for the record, attorney first.
And please support Harry Bachman on behalf of the defendant. Sir, would you state your name for the record?
Albert Heimer Hicks, Jr.
Thank you. Good morning.
The defendant
Good morning, Your Honor.
that he does not wish.
Now, if you heard right there, the defendant Hicks already let out a brief exclamation. I couldn't hear what it was, but it was something, Your Honor. That was her time. Judge Milhouse, no relation to Richard Milhouse Nixon, I hope, that was where she should have said, sir, if you're not being spoken to, you're in a court where it's my obligation and my privilege to direct who is speaking. And so if I haven't told you, Mr. Hicks, here, you can speak on this, then you don't speak. You don't let out exclamations like, that's good, that's fine, I agree. You don't let out anything. You're silent until I tell you that I want you to speak.
Represented by counsel this morning, I will remain in a potential advisory capacity just in case.
Okay. Is that correct, Mr. Hicks?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You know that, so let me see what's happening here. I see an offer that ends up dismissing a lot of matters. I can't be your lawyer, so I'll just tell you what's here. And office was by...
Now, what she said there is correct. She said the first thing that was correct there. She said, I can't be your lawyer, but she didn't make it applicable to him. He doesn't know what that means. All he knows is there's what he wants, and there's what he wants, and he wants it, and that's it. So if you do any sort of explaining that to other people, they would know what you're saying. To Mr. Hicks, that means nothing. If you tell him, oh, there's a rule that you're expected to follow, he forgets that in 10 seconds later because it's in the way of what he wants. And the only thing he knows is, I want it. This is what I want. And he's also in that stage of sovereign citizens that whatever, that they've reversed the order. They, instead of doing what real attorneys do, which is we find out what it is we're entitled to under the law and go into the court and try and convince the court to give us what we're entitled to under the law, they have the role reversed. And they say, okay, let's just find some law that we'll use to basically apply as like jelly to the bread, but we're going to go in and here's what we want. And it doesn't matter if the law allows us to have it or not. We're going to go in there saying, here's what we want, and then we'll just throw some law on top of it that has no meaning or applicability. And they can not get away with that, but they can do it because they have a system that unbelievably does not have a written sense of laws. So when the judge says, well, wait a minute, where do you get off saying that you're entitled to X, Y, Z? They just say, well, in my system we can do it because we have blah, blah, blah. And what the judge should say right then and there is, did you file a written motion? And when the litigant says no, then she'll say, okay, then your motion today, whatever it is that you're trying to put forward, we're going to take it off calendar. You're not going to have that heard today. If you want it heard, you are welcome to file a written motion in accordance with the court rules. But remember, when she says, I'm not your lawyer, what she should have said, so that could come back and act as restrictions on his behavior, is, and therefore I am not going to be responsible for instructing you on how to write or how to research a motion, how to file it, how to serve it, or how to argue it in court. None of those are my responsibility, and since I am the judge, if you don't do those properly, the penalty for your motion not being properly drafted, argued, whatever, will come down on you, and you'll lose your motion, probably. So that's what she should have done there, but she did not do that. She just threw out a sentence that everybody by now has already forgotten. This is not fair to Prosecutor Jansen, who is sitting there watching this go down in flames. The funny part is that it looks like Jansen is in the department store, because I see some refrigerators behind her, and it looks like some fur coats. Maybe that's why later it's hysterical. She says to the judge, "Judge, I want you to call the bailiff in," and she doesn't realize that Mr. Hicks, who's disrupting the court for the 1,000th time, is in his home, unless there's a bailiff in his home. But that's possible. We'll see if that's the case.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the offer. So you have 8 open matters, and there is a recommendation to dismiss 6 of those matters in return for a plea on 2 of the matters, and both matters are being reduced to driving with improper plates. I think.
Now, any litigant that is not insane would take that. And that puts the judge in a little bit of a difficult position, because she has to figure out how far can she go to tip off Mr. Hicks. Mr. Hicks, you are crazy to not take this deal. But he is somebody, and I don't think she realizes this yet, that she can't convince of anything. He can't be convinced of common sense. He can only be convinced that he is to argue, that arguing is in his best interest. That's the policy he's learned by following the sovereign citizen mantra. And so he is just going to argue whether if you said, "I want to give you $1 million," you'd say, I deserve 100 million. Are you crazy? One of the great parts that happens later in this, and I don't really know if we need to get that far into it. It's a very long court appearance. But there's a part where she says to him the most amazing thing, and in other words, I'll get into the details. He tells her that when they come to court, and he tells them that he wants those officers who didn't show up to court, he's going to get fines and costs from them. And she says, "No, you're not," and she just kind of dribbles out like that. Now, the correct thing, if she were a judge, I guess she is a judge, but if she were a real good judge, she would say, "Sir, the law doesn't authorize that. There's no authority in the court rules or in the law. And, sir, if you want to show me different, you can. But again, this will be the 100th time I've told you this. You would have to show me the laws of the state of Michigan that we're in. I don't want to see any laws from Morocco or from some government that you've set up with you and your friends in the backyard. You'd have to show me under the laws that are applicable to this court, which are the laws of the state of Michigan. Show me where it says you are entitled to those, and we'll reconsider." But my knowledge of the case, after having heard 500 cases, is that no, for the officer not showing up, there is no award of fees or costs available to the defendant. Now, the one thing that goes with that, she also lets it go by that when the officers don't show up, the judge dismisses 6 of 8 cases against him without prejudice. Without prejudice. Wait a minute. And what that means is the cases are dismissed, but Crystal Jansen, the prosecutor, has the absolute right and ability to just refile the cases again tomorrow. So the courts that I've been in, I'm going to be delicate here, but the courts that I've been in dismiss the case with prejudice so that the prosecutor is out of luck. If the reason the case is being dismissed is because the officer did not show up to court, then the case is over. The exception to that would be, and this does happen, by the way, if you get a call, if the court, not you, if the court gets a call from the officer and they warn us he's in a shooting or he's been in a shooting or something like that, so he has an absolutely perfect excuse for not being there. Okay, all right, we'll dismiss it without prejudice so that neither side has much of a loss by the officer's inability to be in court. Anyway, let's roll ahead and see how many more mistakes we can find this woman judge. And I don't mean that women judges are unable to do the job, although I do see a lot that I say, I wonder if a man would do that same thing. Now, there are some terrible men judges, and we're going to go over those next week when we have episode 2. It is a male judge who, if you watch the judges on YouTube, you've all seen him. I'll give you a hint. He doesn't wear a robe for reasons I don't understand. But we'll just go back and we'll see what it is that Judge Milhouse is doing incorrectly here.
I just want to make sure there's no issue. Attorney Jansen, what about so we have 4 matters that are pending. Corporal Spidell is here, and he's here on those 4 matters.
Yes.
Okay.
Your Honor, go ahead.
Go ahead. So Mr. Hicks has made a motion before we move forward with the trial.
Your Honor, I guess I would like to speak with Corporal Spidell about these cases, but
Wrong answer. Wrong answer.
Right.
He's made a motion orally. He's made an oral motion. An oral motion. No. That is not fair to the prosecutor, and we'll go over why. What these sovereign citizens do is they stand up and they just start talking law. First of all, it's nonsense, so it doesn't matter. There's no chance it makes any legal sense. It doesn't make any sense at all and shouldn't be given any credence. But the real point is no one should be allowed to do that, even if their arguments were good, because without putting their arguments in writing and getting them to the court and to the prosecutor in advance of the hearing, the prosecutor doesn't have a chance to research the arguments. And I'll tell you, one of the funniest episodes on YouTube is where a prosecutor has had the chance to read the motion in writing in advance of the hearing, and she goes through it and chops it up like a hot knife through butter. She says, this is all wrong. First of all, you cited language in a case that's not in that case. The judge does not fine the litigant in that case. That's a big mistake. Anybody who comes in and falsely apprises the court of the law gets sanctioned. Maybe $20 the first time, but if you come in and you give the court false law, you pay. That's an undeniable rule. But also, remember, the prosecutor, after she gets the written motion from the litigant, she's entitled to file her written motion and get it to the judge 3 days usually before the hearing, or sometimes it's 7 days, and saying, not only is that stuff wrong, but here's the correct law, Your Honor. And so that gives her or him the possibility to just sit there and win the hearing while sitting at your seat and not having to do anything. Just going into court that day, and I mean, I love it. That's why I always filed all of my motions in writing, because it lets you walk in, and if you're not in the mood to argue and talk, you can just say, Your Honor, everything I have to say is in my papers. And boy, do the judges appreciate that. Nothing a judge hates more. Well, there's other things. Judges hate it if you file your arguments in writing, and then the judge says, do you have anything you want to say that's not in your papers? And you get up and you start giving the same arguments in your paper. Now, I'm sure Mr. Hicks will do that, but that pisses off the judges no end. Don't do that. If you've gotten your arguments in writing and they're before the judge has read them. The judge has considered your arguments. Maybe he or she will buy them. We don't know. But that's why you, as the judge, anytime the guy says, I'm just raising up these arguments out of the blue, no, you're not. That's not the way the courts work. Put your arguments in writing with legal authority, and if your authority does support the remedies that you request that the court provide you, then maybe you'll win. But if you just put out blah statements about the Constitution says that we're entitled to be happy, so therefore I'm entitled to drive without a license. No, that's not correct. One of the things I'm so disappointed with these judges, or she would be one, when these people make the argument and say, no, you don't understand. I can drive without a driver's license because the Constitution says I can travel and that it's my right to do so. Well, it is your right to travel. Traveling means going from one place to another. You have that right. But driving is operating a 4,000-pound vehicle at 60 miles per hour down the street. I don't think we should let anybody do that unless they've passed a very strict driving test. But the point is, no, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have the right to operate a car without a driver's license. Anyone who tries to make that argument is absolutely ridiculous. And here would be the example that I would suggest that courts make to people making that dumb argument. And that is, sir, you're saying that the Constitution's provision that you have the right to travel gives you the right to drive without a license. Is that correct? Because you're saying that society and the government can't restrict your right to go from place to place, even if you're doing it in a car that you legally couldn't drive if you were 12, right? You know what? That's a better one. Why don't they say, so, sir, are you saying the government couldn't stop you from driving a car if you were 7? Well, no, something. All right, so now you've got them nailed. But here's the one I was going to say. Why doesn't the judge ask one of these people that's making this argument, sir, so are you saying that if you climb over the fence down at LAX and you get into one of the airplanes that's on the tarmac there and you manage to start it up from your knowledge of playing air pilot or whatever it's called, and you steal an airplane that's not your possession, that you don't have any right to operate that airplane, and you fly that airplane out to Las Vegas, are you saying that it's your right to do that? That the government can't stop you because you're traveling from Michigan, from here to Las Vegas? I said LAX, okay. If you're flying from Michigan to Las Vegas, are you saying the government could not arrest you for that because you're traveling? You're traveling from Michigan to Las Vegas, and so therefore the fact that you stole an airplane to do it means they can't touch you. It's perfectly legal? Of course not. Nobody would say anything that ridiculous. Well, that's the same with, sir, you need a license, and we are protecting other people with your insurance, not you. We're protecting other people with the requirement that you have insurance. And the requirement for registration is we're protecting the police officers. One, it is some people complain that it is a way of raising revenue. Yeah, it does raise revenue that we make people pay for registration for their car because there are expenses involved with keeping track of cars. But no, we want the officer to have the privilege. We want the officer to have the ability to know, as he or she approaches your car, who is it that is in that car. They have the right to know before they walk up there, who is it, whose name is on that car, and is that car stolen or not? If you insist on putting some sort of strange paper up there that says something about, I'm not engaged in commerce, well, first of all, that's a lie, you are. But second of all, no, that doesn't protect the officer who has a right to know what is the name and address of the person that should be operating that car. Also, there's a description. Sometimes if the police have a nice computer in their car, there's also a picture of who's supposed to be operating it. And that gives them a nice ability to know when they walk up to the car, is this the person that's supposed to be in it or not? And that can save an officer's life. If you have a problem with that, you should not be a citizen here. You don't understand the value of preserving the police officer's life. So that's it. We're not going to get into it too deep because this is just the first episode. But so the worst judge in the world today, October 3rd, 2024, is Judge Milhouse. And it doesn't give her first name. Judge Milhouse, who can't keep control of her courtroom or her litigants and does not know how to teach them to be quiet and to not speak one more word or you'll be fined. And also, she does not know how to teach them. And, sir, that means you do not comment or let me know your opinion of my rulings. So when I rule on something and say, no, that's denied, you don't open your mouth. There is no right anywhere in the rules of evidence for a comment, a reply, or to object to a court ruling. There is no such thing as I object to a court ruling. The ruling is the end of it. If you don't like it, you're supposed to know this because you've said you're going to act as your own attorney. But to all those people who aren't acting as attorneys, your remedy is to appeal. The Court of Appeals. There's probably one right there down the hallway from the court that you're in. But there is absolutely no right to argue more with the court. And the slightest bit of that is grounds for a contempt citation and maybe a nice $100 fine. We'll see you next Wednesday for episode 2 of The Worst Judge in the World.